Welcome, pastors, brother and sister pastors, to Rooted the podcast. It occurs to me that maybe, from what I've been hearing anyway, there are folks who are not pastors who are listening to the podcast because many of the topics apply to us just as human beings. I'm trying to specifically apply these topics to what it means to be in pastoral ministry, but all that to say welcome to anyone who might be listening today. I wanted to say one thing just about logistics here as we try to do this podcast faithfully, at least once a week. And that is that we are continuing. We're new at this. We've got some pretty good equipment, but we're learning how to use it. And we don't have a studio. The studio is my dining room. And so bear with us as we work on technical difficulties. There's a moment here and there when you might hear something and you wonder what that is. It could be the fan on my laptop. It could be, who knows, but just know that we're working on all of that, and hopefully you can still hear clearly what we're saying, and somehow these topics are relevant to your life as I try to share them authentically from my own. So in terms of topic today, I was set to move on from what we shared last time, which had to do with the faithfulness of God and pausing in the midst of the busyness of life to reflect upon His faithfulness. But I couldn't let it go, and I felt like I needed to do a part two. A couple of thoughts about this theme of looking at our past to see, not just looking ahead at the challenges of the present and the future, and the potential pain that we might face, or the pain we're facing today, which can tend to be our focus. But to make sure that in the midst of crying out to God about all of that we're looking back at how faithful He has been in our past. And it occurs to me that hymn that I heard sung at my friend Bill and Carol's celebration a couple weeks back, that hymn comes out of Lamentations 3, as most of you, especially you pastors, would know. In some of the greatest pain that Israel had been in, they were under siege. They'd been under siege for a long time. They were, according to the text, they were literally eating their horses, and maybe this is metaphorical, but they were contemplating the death of their own children, and then maybe having to, this is horrific to say, I've thought it because I've read it in Lamentations 2, but to say it on a podcast is insane, it seems. But they were contemplating nourishing themselves on the flesh of their own children. That's how much pain they were in, because they were literally dying, and their children were dying. They were crying out to God on behalf of their children, who were literally starving to death because they were under siege. And it's in the middle of that incredible pain that the words about God's faithfulness are written by Jeremiah the prophet. And that His mercies are new every morning, and that His compassions, they fail not. And it occurred to me, I did a little bit of my own timeline on where I'd seen God's faithfulness, but it occurred to me that I found myself, this is rare for me, again, as a type 8 on the Enneagram, I just say whatever it is, how raw and real it is, you just have to deal with it. But I found myself kind of sanitizing some of what I shared last time. I talked about God meeting us in some early marital pain, 6 months into my marriage. Again, I'm ashamed to share this. I'm ashamed. And yet, God has healed me from this way of living and dealing with my own wound, and also has forgiven me, and my wife has forgiven me. But in the midst of an unbelievably intense argument 6 months into our marriage, I put my hands on my wife, something I thought I would never ever do. To me, that was the lowest form of maleness, that you would take your strength and abuse it, put it on someone you care about, or just someone who was at least physically weaker. My wife, my precious wife, my best friend, and I shoved her across the room. I was a big guy, always have been a larger guy since college, and she was about 5'4", and tiny, and she's strong, but she couldn't handle that kind of strength, and shouldn't have had to. And that night, she wanted to leave me, and I wouldn't have blamed her. In fact, I'm amazed that she stayed with me, and God met us there. His his compassions failed not. His mercies, his new mercies were there in that mobile home in 1977, early 1978. Green and orange shag carpet, matching green and orange furniture, trailer furniture, as we wept for 3 or 4 solid hours, and then I repented and told her that no matter what had happened in that argument, this was all on me. It was my stuff. I didn't even know I had. And I owned it. I repented of it. We buried our heads in that green and orange couch. And I asked God to forgive me and to help my wife to forgive me in time. The next day I was at a church service where I didn't tell anybody what had gone on. I just sobbed at the front of the church when they had this open time of prayer. The elders prayed for me, and then the next day I was in a therapist's office, beginning my healing journey from some of the shame and pain that basically I had sublimated in football for the last decade. When you take all your anger and put it into a sport like football, I mean, you're applauded. And in fact, some of you know I became a small college All-American. I don't think I was really that good, but I was madder than hell, and I played like that. And I think that's part of what was awarded. But I had to deal with that anger because I had no place to take it in appropriate ways when I got done playing ball. And so I started my healing journey. That was the faithfulness of God. The fact that I was even able to have the grace to own my stuff when so many blame and live into 25 or 50 years of addiction because they never own their stuff. Great is thy faithfulness. Yeah, and I could go on and talk about some of the challenges we've had in ministry. I remember at the age of 36, we had gone through a 3-year battle with some well-meaning but very entrenched legalists. I hate to label folks, but it was legalism. That's what it was. It was all about the law, what they had always been about and done, and why couldn't I just do what they'd always done? And so it was 3 years of living hell. And I remember one day, after an especially intense episode of confrontation from one of the brothers in this community, I went home and literally fell on the floor sobbing. And I just said, Carl, I can't do it anymore. I think I was, quite frankly, again, not to be melodramatic, but I'm trying to be more authentic about the faithfulness of God in my journey. I think I was near a nervous breakdown. I remember my little 5, 6, 7-year-old daughter, maybe she was, about 7 by that time, Andrea, who's now 36. It was quite a few years ago. She fell on top of me and started weeping because her daddy was weeping. And then my wife, this really gets me, even all these years later, she fell on top of me. And we had a retreat coming up, a leaders retreat, and somehow God met us in that pain. He was so faithful to us. His mercies were new and complete and covering. His love was present to us. And I could talk about, the near suicide attempt of that same year or shortly thereafter, and God met me there because I was so empty. I didn't know that God loved me, but He, instead of allowing me to take my life, He met me and began to show me how much He loved me as my Father, as my Abba. I could talk about the fact that I had a long journey of healing, and a friend came to me and introduced me to a master's in social work who became the closest thing I ever had to a mentor over the years. Her name was Sean Downey, and walked with me and walked with Carla and our family for the next 10, 12, 14 years. Great is thy faithfulness in the midst of that kind of need for deep healing. That I had many gifts, but I had so much wound that came out, and while I was trying to help people heal, I would hurt people and not even know I was hurting them at times. And then when I got fired at the age of 48 from this church that we changed the name from Ebenezer Baptist to Grace Community Church. This was still that second church, and then began to confront the race issue in Detroit because we were a Detroit church. Wouldn't have mattered. We needed to confront the race issue anyway because it's part of the gospel. And got fired over the race issue, but also over some of my own continued battle with my anger, some language that I used that was inappropriate, and God met me there. Met our church there. That church is still going and is still going strong. Met me there. Took Carl and I out to a church plant called Hope Community Church, where we spent the last 16 years. Still are members there now. Great is thy faithfulness. When we were so broken and so wounded, and after 14 years at Ebenezer/Grace and felt so alone, he met us. And it occurs to me as I look back at Lamentations 3 that the word wait is used in the midst of this faithfulness of God that meets Israel in her pain. Great is your faithfulness. And then he says, the Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should hope and wait quietly for the Lord. And it occurs to me that when we reflect on God's faithfulness in the midst of present pain, it helps us to wait on the deliverance that we think has to come now. But we've heard this over the years. We believe that God is our Father, and his timing is right. He's not going to desire us to suffer unnecessarily. And so sometimes we say, now, Lord, now. And you may be a pastor right now that's saying, now, Lord, I need it now. But as Israel reflected in the midst of that kind of pain where she said, deliver us now, reflected on God's faithfulness in the past and his mercies that were new every morning, then God's Spirit helped them to wait. Reflecting on God's faithfulness helps us to wait in our present pain for his deliverance. Reflecting on his faithfulness to deliver us in the past helps us to wait on God's faithfulness in present pain and maybe future anxiety. An author I read years ago, her name was Sue Monk Kidd, once said, because waiting, we hate it. We hate waiting. She said, when you're waiting, you're not doing nothing. When you're waiting, you're letting your soul grow up. And so you might be in a season of pain. I don't mean to sound cliche when people use that phrase, season of. It sounds so cliche to me, but you know what I'm saying. If you're in a period of time when you're just under it, and it's so tough to wait for the deliverance of God or his direction, for his guidance, for what he's going to share with you in his mercies for your future, or how he's going to handle your present pain. I'm encouraging you to reflect on his faithfulness, no matter how deep the pain. I'm thinking of how God met us in Carla's cancer. We still don't know the end of that story, but we're trying to reflect on how God has been faithful so that no matter what the news we get, we will know that God is still there faithfully with his mercies. And that we'll be able to wait. We don't have to know the future. We can wait until we get there because we know God, that faithful God that we're reflecting upon, that's been with us all along, will be with us even then. So, I feel like I've gotten more to the heart of what I wanted to say in the last podcast, in this podcast, because I think I've allowed myself to go deeper into my own pain and where God has met me in that pain. And so thanks for listening. I hope this has been encouraging to you. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. I love you all. Even though I don't know all of you, I love you. Believe it. I love you, Pastor. And if you want to connect personally, go to the website, www.rootedministries.co. Let's connect or email me and let's talk. In the meanwhile, reflect on God's faithfulness today. He's got you. His mercies are there for you today. He's got you no matter what you're going through. God bless.